Hi, I'm Grace. I know it says Elise. This is my roommate's computer. And today, thank you for watching our video. We're going to be covering homelessness and poverty in the US, some stuff we've learned in class, along with our own personal research and findings. So, homelessness is recorded by the federal government to impact 1.5 million people in the US every year, but that number is actually estimated to be about twice that, just in terms of how many people go without housing every year. So these are the issues that each of us are going to be touching on. We may specify at times whether we're referring to rural, urban, or suburban poverties because they're very different geographically. Um, but can I move this? Yes, I can. Okay. Um, but we will specify if necessary. If not, we're just going to be doing general overall stuff. So I wanted to start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I have to move it back. Okay. So as we can see, this is an overall pyramid of well-being for folks achieving I would say it ties into the American dream, the ethos of it, but it's just an overall well-being. We need these things to flourish as human beings. But at the very bottom here, we have our physiological needs, and one of them is shelter. And if you are unhoused, you are unsheltered, and therefore it's really hard to meet these needs. So let's go into this. I'm clicking, it's not doing anything. There we go. Okay, so with health in relationship to homelessness and poverty, you can't quite see here at the bottom, but homelessness almost always leads to poor health because it is really hard to take care of yourself in situations such as being without shelter. And in some cases, poor health also can lead to homelessness. Not always, but it can. This is a statistic I found. It's really important when we're having these difficult conversations because homelessness can be really severe and inhumane. It's important to think about what this really means, like when people are homeless, what this is doing to them. So this is a big number. It shocked me when I came across this statistic. Another statistic that shocked me is that $2 trillion are spent on healthcare in the US, and that's more than any other industrialized nation, but we still rank 30th in life industry. And we learned from In Sickness and in Wealth that social class is the #1 determinant of health. So that is a big part of what's robbing people of all these years, and that is a severe issue. So health issues that cause people to go homeless, inability to work. When you are physically ill, you can't really work. We all have sick days. We all have the flu at times. It makes it impossible to work and bring an income. And if you don't have income, you can't pay for all these other needs, housing included. When it comes to mental illness, some folks have severe mental illness, and there may be cases where they have the inability to hold jobs or responsibilities, and some folks they don't know how severe it is, or they're not diagnosed with mental illness problems early on. So that can be another contributing factor. And even if they are diagnosed, the medication can be really expensive, and so some people can't afford to pay for that treatment. With that, there's also, under this umbrella of disabilities, there's also physical disabilities. Lots of jobs are really physically demanding when you're on the brink of homelessness, and so that makes them inaccessible. Then sometimes there's a lack of healthcare. This can be for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of debate about who should get healthcare, if it's a human right, if it's something we need to pay for, what's doing a good job, what's not. But the bottom line is that when you don't have healthcare, cost of medication is really expensive. Prevention is really hard. There's the inability to diagnose diseases. If you live in a rural area, you might not even be able to access health care in the first place because just being able to physically get somewhere. And then we went over a bunch of social safety nets in class, SNAP in particular, TANF, Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, the Affordable Care Act. But clearly, based on the statistics I've shown, something is going wrong. People are falling between the cracks, and so there needs to be a strengthening of them of some sort. And medical care in the US is super expensive. So medical bills and debt are another thing that can contribute to this issue. Next, going back, COVID is also exacerbating all these issues. It's pushed millions more people into homelessness, hundreds of millions of people more into homelessness, and the poverty rate is expected to drop without this. And this was a public health issue, putting people in quarantine, you know, people not having their needs met, having to isolate was a health issue that caused a lot of folks to become homeless. So in turn, though, there can be health issues that are caused by homelessness or poverty, a lack of shelter in extreme weather. It's so hard to recuperate from any illnesses one may have. If you have surgery, if you have a cut that improperly heals, that can be infection. A cold can lead to pneumonia. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but it can exacerbate health problems. So anything from mental illness can be actually triggered by homelessness, or it can be worsened. Substance abuses, like alcoholism, other substance abuses, depression can be triggered, and it can be really hard to overcome these things because there's no solution in sight often, and it just gets worse by the day. This was a little out of order, but we also have poor nutrition, malnutrition. You know, I don't know if you remember donating to food banks as a kid, but often those foods are high in sugar, starch, salt, because they are preserved, and so it's very hard to access healthy food. We talked a little bit about this with SNAP, which how, you know, the foods that are easiest, the most convenient and accessible, they are often malnourishing. Yes, and then we also, there can be the spread of disease. COVID is the most likely one that comes to mind, but this has been happening forever with flu, respiratory illnesses, hepatitis, TB, you name it. So this is a public health issue because if you know, we just said if you're not housed, you're likely to spread disease. And every time COVID is spread, it mutates, and that impacts all of us in some way. It impacts communities. Communities who, you know, see trash in the street and higher rates of crime, and you know, often if there's an addiction crisis in the area, there are needles on the street, and you know, this is not great for the community. But in addition, it's just not great for the folks who have to live it, the actual suffering of the homeless folks. It's not great for the loved ones who have to watch it happen, have to see that happen to their loved ones. People can't, you know, work their way up Maslow's pyramid. There's less educational opportunities. And then there's also a lot of drainage on city workers, health, and city resources trying to take care of these folks, but not really taking care of them, just cleaning up after them. This is more in an urban setting. I have a friend whose dad is a ER physician in Spokane, and it really sucks having to get these people, these houseless people in such severe condition, and then have to send them right back onto the street, and they are in the hospital within the next few days, and that drains time that he could have spent on other patients, and it also could have been prevented in the first place. And then lastly, we have climate change, which is a more recent issue. As we saw this last summer with like all the heat waves, there was cooling centers that were made to help people with this, but whatever weather extreme it is, it hits houseless folks first, and often takes their lives because of it. So solutions, what can we do? Housing is healthcare. If you do not have your basic physiological needs met, you cannot meet the rest of them. It is prevention. And we also saw in a documentary how folks who had that leg up with COVID were often like able to recover a lot easier. So yes, it is one of those things we can do as far as health. We can create access for people with disabilities. We can create jobs for them and make sure that they know that they're valued and important. And same thing with the destigmatization of mental health. It's a serious issue. We need to get people the help that they need before it gets serious, and let them know that treatment options. A big part of that is cost, though. So whether we need to strengthen social safety nets, this includes healthcare, which is a hot topic, hot button issue, and people have many different opinions on how we go about this. But I will say that with prevention, we are paying one way or another. We may as well pay it forward. How we do that is also a hot topic of debate, but paying it forward is how we prevent these situations from happening. One of these could be an economic strategy, like raising the poverty line so that more folks are able to access things like free healthcare and the programs we currently have. So with that, Logan's going to go into who is impacted. And so Logan, take it away.
Hi, I'm Logan, and I'm going to be talking about how race, gender, incarceration, housing, and unemployment contribute to homelessness. Incarcerated people are 10 times more likely to become homeless than the general population. This chart shows us which groups of incarcerated people are most susceptible to becoming homeless. The most susceptible groups are those who are Black, Hispanic, female, older, or are repeated offenders. Interesting, incarcerated people are the most likely to become homeless within 2 years of release. There is opportunity to step in and help those coming out of the prison system transition back into society so less incarcerated people end up on the streets. Looking at the incarceration rates by race and gender, see that people of color, particularly Black men, are more likely to enter the prison system than white men. The same relationship happens for women too, but the incarceration rate for women is about 10 times lower than it is for men. Our key takeaways are that people of color are more likely to enter the prison system, then, once incarcerated, are more likely to become homeless down the road. The homeless population is roughly 70% male, 29% female, and 1% transgender or non-binary. The big question is, why is this? As we have seen, men are much more likely to become incarcerated than women. Men are also more likely to become veterans, which is also linked to increased risk of homelessness, as Angel will discuss later. Breaking down the homelessness population by race, see that Black Americans make up a disproportionate amount of the homeless population. Looking into the numbers, Black Americans make up 40% of the homeless population, yet only 14% of the total population. So, are Black Americans more likely to become homeless? As we've seen in this class, there have been decades of institutionalized racism in this country, which has made building wealth difficult for families of color. Also, Black Americans are more likely to become incarcerated or unemployed. All of us know we're in the midst of a housing crisis. How does housing crisis affect homelessness? Currently, 1 in 3 households spend more than 3% of their monthly income on housing. 1 in 7 households spend over half of their income on housing. In the last 10 years, the price of land and housing has skyrocketed. Looking into home ownership, see that white Americans are much more likely to own homes than Black Americans. Also, Black Americans spend, on average, more of their monthly income on housing. It is harder for people of color to make rent or mortgage payments each month, and this effect is worsened for low-income families. Missing payments can lead to foreclosures and evictions, increasing the risk of homelessness for families of color. Unemployment is higher for people of color too, notably for Black men. Not having a dependable source of income is linked to higher rates of homelessness and crime. During the pandemic, we saw record rates of unemployment. The pandemic affected different ethnic and racial groups differently. Black and Hispanic experienced higher unemployment rates than their white, Asian, and non-Hispanic counterparts. In summary, there's a high correlation between incarceration and homelessness. People of color are more susceptible to becoming incarcerated and are more likely to become homeless as a result. Homeownership is more difficult for people of color, and people of color have higher unemployment rates. The pandemic only worsened the problem as Black and Hispanic Americans were more negatively affected due to the rise in unemployment. Overall, we have seen that there are significant systematic issues in the United States that lead to a disproportionate number of Black Americans becoming homeless.
All right, hello guys, I'm Abby and I will be talking about childhood homelessness, the causes, impacts, and experiences. So what is childhood homelessness? We must remember that homelessness is when a whole person is lacking in most areas of their life at a severe level. So childhood homelessness will find a child lacking in permanent housing or shelter, which means living on the streets, and a shelter doubling up. Doubling up means the movement between living with family members and friends, and this could also include a parent. The child will also lack in nutrition, clean water, and basic hygienic needs, and their quality of education or opportunities are smaller. A child experiencing homelessness is just trying to survive, so they have no basic necessity or comfort, and they do not have the money in order to obtain that comfort or necessity, those basic necessity needs. So the group most vulnerable and affected within the subcategory of homelessness would be children from 0 to age 13 and those who live in literal homelessness. In the United States, from 2016 to 2017, 1.3 million students experienced homelessness. And since then, especially with COVID, it's only grown larger. You cannot easily detach a child's issues from their parents, especially when it concerns homelessness. Most often, the parents have a major impact on a child, whether they are absent or they are the ones who bring their child into homelessness with them. Some family issues that can lead to homelessness would be parent incarceration, parent unemployment, which means the basic needs like housing or food cannot be met because there is no income. Single parenthood, primarily for mothers, can result in no housing because there's simply not enough money to pay all the bills and have food on the table because there isn't dual income. And this also kind of results in not enough parental supervision, which can also kind of be a result of a lack of attention, which indirectly can influence a child's chances of becoming homeless by influencing delinquent behaviors, which could also lead to the child's incarceration. Brokenness at home is also another major factor, such as divorce or abuse, and these things can be traumatizing to children and lessen their ability to cope with different situations or cause them to do different things that will result in homelessness. There are other factors as well that can contribute to homelessness in adolescents, still related to their parents. Experiencing homelessness as a child makes it more likely that the child will become homeless as an adult. And delinquent behaviors, like I said before, can lead to incarceration. Also, running away, maybe there's family problems due to unrest at home without the means to live is directly related to homelessness. I had a friend who ran away from home due to some family problems, and he didn't have the means to live, and so he ended up just living on the streets, homeless, of Portland, which was traumatizing to his parents and himself. Now he's okay, but at the time it was difficult. Also, the lack of education can increase the risk of homelessness, especially if a child is being moved from school to school. Education then is less consistent, and there's a higher chance that the child could drop out or not gain the knowledge that they need to gain. And then there are also mechanisms of coping that can prevent escaping from homelessness. And these are internalizing, which is the most common mechanism of coping with stresses, but it doesn't actually address the problem. It just traps everything inside and kind of builds up. And then delinquency, it can be a result of internalizing, but it is where stress is released through things like substance abuse. And then externalizing is an extreme symptom, and these are when behaviors are significantly higher than the level of competence. And what I mean by the level of competence is that ability to be resilient and to be able to cope with a situation. Now we will discuss the effects of childhood homelessness, and there are many effects that come out of being homeless. It is first important to remember, however, that this is multidimensional, and this issue involves the body, mind, and well-being. Immediate effects of childhood homelessness are developing mental illnesses, not being able to cope with life situations, engaging in risky behaviors, becoming malnourished, and having that lack of quality education. A child can experience high levels of depression and anxiety, and it doesn't help the child if he or she is living in dangerous areas which can result in chronic stress and could result also in being abused or assaulted. And sadly, 70% of people experiencing homelessness have personality disorders from trauma that they have had to endure. And then malnutrition and health problems are a result because of that lack of access to health services and food. And then, which is very difficult as the child is developing. And then when a child experiences homelessness as a child, that can impact them as they become an adult. And this can result in the risk of being homeless, because the longer you're on homelessness, the likely you'll stay in homelessness. And there is a higher risk of being unemployed. And in addition, there tends to be a life expectancy below the average life expectancy. So the next slide I have is a graph, and it just compares the different, it compares the likeliness of having a mental illness between literal homelessness, doubling up, and not being homeless. And as you can see, the competence level is significantly lower in literal homelessness than doubling up or even homelessness, it's not being homelessness. And then for different outlets like primarily internalizing, and delinquency, and then having those extreme symptoms are higher for literal homelessness than any other category. There are some protective factors that can help build resilience in a child, and these are like shelters, government resources. It is found that if a child just has a roof over their head, it's a lot better than being out on the streets. So doubling up is will have that protective factor. And then having that supportive person, a teacher or a friend, is super important, that the child knows that there's someone there to love them and to provide comfort for them. And then parent attention and care is another protective factor. So lastly, this is a slide that if you want to go back to the slides, you can click on this link and watch how COVID has impacted childhood homelessness. In brief, 150 million children have been added to home poverty due to COVID-19. And it is very difficult because shelters had to cut their numbers of available beds and close their doors completely, which meant that there were more people in homelessness and unsheltered, and probably still are. Oops, my bad. And then people who had jobs lost their jobs and ended up in shelters, and some ended up homeless. So some solutions, just real quick, are obviously housing options. There's something called rapid rehousing, and its goal is to quickly connect renters with permanent, affordable housing to service and connect them with services to keep them on the right track. And obviously, this is a short-term rental assistance to avoid literal homelessness and encourage self-sufficiency. And then getting people into homes significantly help them being able to deal with other aspects of their life, whether that be looking for a job or being able to focus more on their kids. And so housing is a very important thing that we need to find more solutions for too. And then obviously programs with prisons for rehabilitation for children, and being able to provide them with resources and make sure that when they get out, they're in good hands. Assistance and services, having that community-wide response to helping people get through, whether that be Voucher 8 housing applications quicker, or being able to provide them with upfront prevention and diversion resources is super important to help slow the cycle of homelessness, or even to begin that cycle of homelessness. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you for listening to my part of this presentation.
Hello, my name is Angel, and today I'm going to be talking about veterans and how homelessness and poverty can affect this community. Some key facts that are important to note before we get into the nitty-gritty are historically and in present day, being a veteran puts a person at a significantly higher risk of being homeless than their civilian counterparts. In 2019, 21 out of every 10,000 veterans were homeless, and 5% of this were women. Veterans of color are more likely to be homeless than their white counterparts. And speaking about COVID-19, COVID-19 has significantly interrupted programs that are allocated to help veterans who are struggling with homelessness and poverty due to restrictions and government COVID mitigations. Lastly, it's important to note that the VA, Veterans Association, cannot help every veteran that seeks help through them. And this results in some people falling through the cracks without a support system. This is because the VA is understaffed and underfunded, and there are a significantly large amount of veterans that are trying to get one form or another of help, not necessarily all homeless or in poverty. But it's important to note that the VA cannot help everyone. That being said, the VA does offer a significant amount of help to veterans. Yes. When we're talking about food insecurity in the veteran community, this quote really stuck out to me. U.S. veterans are less likely to live in poverty than their non-veteran counterparts, but approximately 1.5 million veterans live below the federal poverty line. In addition, 2.4 million veterans are thought to live paycheck to paycheck at approximately twice the federal poverty line. And when we're talking about food insecurity and poverty, this is a really important quote. We're looking at 1.5 million people who are below federal poverty, and almost double that amount that are unable to live really off more than their paycheck. This means that there are 2.4 million veterans who are unable to put money into savings or buy things outside of the normal food, rent, money, stuff like that. And they're living month to month. That means if that paycheck doesn't come, these people don't have money to live on. And so when we're looking at groups of veterans that are at risk and more likely to experience food insecurity as well as poverty, this is mainly Afghanistan and Iraqi war veterans, female veterans, those that have experienced or are currently experiencing homelessness, and those with mental illnesses. This just goes to show that homelessness, food insecurity, and poverty are a cycle. If you are experiencing poverty, it is likely that you can experience homelessness. And if you're experiencing homelessness, it's likely that you're experiencing poverty and food insecurity. The next thing I'm going to talk about is some factors that are affecting veterans, like what makes them more likely to be homeless. So the big things are poor mental health coming from the service into the civilian world. They have stress, PTSD, some even have undiagnosed mental illnesses and depression. When looking at pay grades, those who are younger, who left the service at a younger and lower rank, are more likely to experience poverty due to the lack of time that they had to save money and the lesser pay that they were getting. A lack of structure and guidance into the transition between the military and civilian world is another important factor. This means that veterans aren't getting information about jobs, financial management, and financial tools to allow them to succeed as they leave the military. And the last two are poor coping skills like addiction and debt, overspending mainly when we're talking about debt, and lack of affordable housing. When you're in the military, one option that is available to you is housing on base that is affordable and military members receive an allowance for. When leaving the military, this option disappears, and some veterans are met with the fact that they do not have enough money to afford housing outside of the military. Next, I'm going to talk about how these factors lead to homelessness and poverty. When we are talking about the transition between military and civilian worlds, there is a struggle to convert military experience and job titles and things like this into a civilian equivalent. This can lead to lack of work and even being paid less than they should be because their qualifications don't transfer over to the civilian world. Like I said earlier, a lower pay grade can lead to poor financial management and less money to save for the future. So when these younger members of the military leave earlier, sometimes after 4 years, sometimes after 8, they still haven't saved up a lot of that money. And this can lead to them living paycheck to paycheck, like we talked about. This third bullet point, when a military member has little to no support, this can lead to helplessness. It can lead to paralysis when it comes to learning about the world, the civilian world, figuring out how the job market works, figuring out how to apply for jobs, how to manage their finances. And when you don't have this support network that and structure that a person had in the military, it's quite likely that some people will fall through the cracks and end up poor or homeless. And then lastly, poor financial management can lead to debt, which can lead to poverty and homelessness. This comes from a lack of financial instruction and knowledge of financial well-being. When you're in the military, you're less likely to learn about how to manage your finances and how to be financially well, because there are not programs like that at the current moment to teach military members about that, whereas a civilian would get that information. So some solutions. Before leaving the military, some solutions are to offer better financial programs, better availability of courses that allow military members to learn about financial planning and financial well-being for their future and also for their time in the military. Another solution is to offer more assistance and knowledge to those who are looking to make the transition from military to civilian life. This is important because it allows people to have a support system as they are preparing to transition into a civilian world, and they're offered more knowledge and real world advice that will help them set them up for success in the future. And lastly, before leaving the military, a very important solution is to teach younger members of the military, those who enter at 18, 19, and older, the importance of nutrition, stress management, tools, and financial well-being. I've already touched on financial well-being, but when it comes to nutrition and stress management, most of these younger military members are not really grocery shopping for themselves. They're eating at the chow hall, and so when they leave the military, there's this lack of knowledge on how to feed themselves a balanced meal, and that they won't get in the military. And so this proposed solution would kind of negate that and allow them to know how to feed themselves on a budget and how to feed themselves in a healthy way in general. And stress management is really important because as college students, we all know that stress is part of everyday life, but also can really negatively affect the person. If you're stressed, it's harder to work and it's harder to focus. So learning stress management is a really important thing for these younger people. And then when we're talking about programs, my solutions when it comes to programs is to allocate more funding towards private and government programs that are assisting in helping veterans transition. Because right now, a lot of these groups that are trying to help veterans with homelessness, imminent homelessness, or even just poverty in general, are lacking funding, especially due to COVID, and are understaffed because they're underfunded. So some really important and really good examples of programs that help veterans is the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, which offers loans, help with mortgages. They offer legal help when veterans are looking at foreclosure and imminent homelessness with their family. They offer temporary shelter, or the Veterans Association, which we talked about, who offers programs that can help shelter families, help clothe children who are affected by parents who are homeless, as well as just some smaller loans. But yeah, this was my presentation on veterans, and I'm going to turn it over to our concluder. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Here are our sources, the first page, second, third, and fourth of our research sources. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you have an amazing holiday and that you learned a lot from our presentation. Bye.